Welcome to Prophecy Countdown with author and pastor Kenneth Baer. Join us every week for the latest updates on what the Bible has to say about the events, the characters, and prophetic signs of the return of Jesus Christ and His coming kingdom. Make sure you not only subscribe, but like your favorite episodes and share it with your friends. Now, on with the broadcast.
Welcome to Prophecy Countdown. I'm Pastor Ken. And welcome to today's prophecy update. Today's message is number 437, Signs of the Time. On Wednesdays, our prophecy updates premiere on over 14 channels at 11 a.m. And then on Sunday, our episodes premiere at 1 p.m. We welcome your comments, your questions, and any ideas you may have for future episodes. You can email us at prophecycountdownpodcast@gmail.com. I respond to all of those emails myself. Now let's get into today's reading, number 437, Signs of the Time, and we'll be looking at the beginning of what is known as the Olivet Discourse. Today we're continuing our journey through the Gospel of Matthew, but we'll also be taking the opportunity to answer some questions that we have received. One of these questions we often receive are on the signs of the time, and that is our topic of our message today. Jesus made it clear that no one will actually know the day or the hour of His coming. However, at the same time, Jesus did answer the question posed to Him by His apostles about the timing of His second coming. Let me read to you where we are now in Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 3, going through verse 8. Now as He, that's Jesus, sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to Him privately saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginnings of sorrows." As I get started today, I want you to know that much of my teaching today is coming directly from my latest book, The Apocalypse and Coming Kingdom. The book actually sold out when it was first released about 13 months ago. Order yourself a copy. Just go to Amazon and type in my name, Kenneth Baer, or the title of the book, The Apocalypse and Coming Kingdom. Now, the best source for clues regarding the timing of His second coming, also called the second advent of Jesus Christ, other than my book, is what's referred to as the Olivet Discourse or Olivet Prophecy. And specifically, Matthew chapters 24 and 25, where Jesus is responding to the apostles' very important question. In fact, this question is often asked today. This is what it says in Matthew 24:3, and this is exactly the questions that many of us get. Tell us, what will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? The time of the signs of the time. Just last week, we covered the amazing prophecy of Jesus when He said, "Assuredly, I tell you that not one stone will be left upon another that will not be thrown down." That's the first two verses of Matthew 24. It's this statement that actually provides the occasion for the apostles to ask Him the question they asked Jesus about the sign of the times. Now, Jesus had entered Jerusalem just a few days before on Palm Sunday by traveling from the Mount of Olives through the descent into the Kidron Valley. He entered the old city through what is known as the Eastern Gate, riding on a donkey in fulfillment of Scripture. The Eastern Gate was actually sealed up 500 years ago by the order of the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. the ruler of the Ottoman Empire, very famous sultan. He did this so that the Jewish Messiah could not pass through the Eastern Gate and fulfill a lot of Jewish tradition that was loosely based on Scripture. In addition to the sealed up Eastern Gate, to ensure that the Jewish Messiah could not enter the city through the Eastern Gate, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent had a cemetery added just below the old city gate. The idea was that good religious Jews would be prohibited from passing through a cemetery. In reality, Suleiman the Magnificent was actually 1,500 years too late. Now, getting back to our scripture referenced earlier, the apostles had asked Jesus important questions about the sign of his coming and the end of the age. These verses are so important, they're worth repeating. Starting in verse 4, Jesus says, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. And all of these things are the beginning of sorrows." Now, there's probably been more conversation lately regarding the last days referencing these last 4 verses than any other verses in the Bible. Who hasn't heard about wars or rumors of wars, of famines and earthquakes in various places? However, this is not what Jesus said. Jesus is making a statement regarding those things throughout history. While unfortunate and often devastating, are not necessarily a sign of his coming and the end of the age. Jesus tells us that there must be false messiahs and that deception will run wild, just as there are wars and rumors of wars. They must happen because they are all part of man's fallen nature. They are things that happen. They have been going on for thousands of years and will continue until the end. Jesus said all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Jesus continues, and he says that nation will rise against nation. That's verse 7. The word nation, by the way, is the Greek word ethnos. It's where we get the English word ethnicity. And thus it does not necessarily refer to countries rising up against countries, but to people groups rising up against other people groups. This, along with famines and earthquakes from place to place, marks what Jesus calls the beginning of sorrows. Now, that word sorrows that's used in verse 7 is a Greek word that is also referred to as labor pains, also known as birth pains. It's the special word that talks about that groaning, that pain that a mother has prior to a child being born. You know, most people know about birth pains, and I've been told as a man that I cannot possibly fully understand how intense birth pains actually get as a woman's pregnancy is drawing to a close. However, for the purpose of illustration, allow me to elaborate. While life begins at conception, it is not uncommon for a woman to take a pregnancy test. And why does she do that? To determine whether or not she's actually pregnant. Months will go by, and little by little, there are little telltale signs that confirm there is indeed a baby that is coming. The doctor checks periodically to make sure the baby and the mother are doing well. And one of the things the doctor always tells the mother is about the birth pains. These birth pains, the doctor explains, are the final signs that the baby is about to be delivered. So the doctor explains how they are different from any other pains and contractions she may experience. From the moment of conception, there was a feeling, an assurance, and a certainty that the baby was on its way. Just before the baby is born, the mother and father begin to prepare. They prepare for the day that they would finally see their child face to face. However, for much of the pregnancy, much of the 9 months, life went on as usual. No doubt the last trimester, unlike the first 6 months, was somewhat challenging for the mother especially. Occasionally, especially during the final trimester, the mother feels contractions. and she'll think, this must be it, only to discover that it isn't. These false labor pains, called Braxton Hicks contractions, are very similar to the real thing, but they are not. However, the one thing that all true birth pains have in common is that they continually grow more intense and more frequent. Ultimately, a baby is born. And there's absolutely no doubt about it that the baby comes through intense pain. However, once this intense pain is over, suddenly the greatest joy is experienced in the birth of the child. This is exactly what Jesus meant when he said that the preliminary signs are like birth pains. They are the final act in the natural order of things. They begin relatively mildly, but gain intensity, frequency, and duration. Many believe that while all of the naturally occurring unfortunate and often devastating events that Jesus mentioned are in themselves not necessarily the signs of his return, these devastating events are to become more intense and more frequent as the time of Jesus' coming approaches. Few can argue that what we've seen in the past few years is anything but normal. Perhaps some of us in our own community or our own nation, using our own nation as a reference point, but what we've seen in this country, the United States, also in Canada and Israel, Great Britain, Australia, it's happening nearly every country in the world. There's something amiss. And it's not just one pain. It's all the amazing number of pains, all happening at the same time, with all of the governments of the world implementing severe and often draconian measures. Here in the United States, we've not only had lockdowns and business closures and the mandates that were associated with COVID-19 a few years ago, but we also have had seasons of political unrest. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, critical race theory, LGBTQ+, climate change. All these activists have had their opportunities to advance their radical agendas beyond what seemed possible even a few years before. What previously was a conspiracy theory has become regular talking points on the evening news. Organizations like the United States and the World Economic Forum post information on their websites that only before were conspiracies. These talking points include a new world order, a great reset, a global call to end borders, and nationalism. Regardless of whether economic decline, climate change, coronavirus, or CRT in themselves are the true crisis or have been manufactured for maximum political benefit, the result is the same. No one escapes these pains, and they're becoming more intense and more frequent. They all point to one thing. These are the birth pains that Jesus referred to as a sign of the end of the age and his second coming. Now, before we move on from Jesus' comments to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, we need to go back to one of the greatest warnings that Jesus gives, and it's his very first warning. He says, "Take heed that no one deceives you." That's verse 4. This comment about deception is the very first thing that Jesus warned the disciples, his followers, to know. He warns his disciples, and that includes us by extension, all of us, that we need to, when we see these signs, be not deceived. You know, one of the hardest things for the believer living in the period just prior to the second coming or the coming tribulation will be dealing with deception. I do not believe it is a coincidence that everyone has heard the term fake news, and it's often applied to both sides of the political divide, those supporting a cause and those opposing a cause, whether it's government action or what scientists say, or those opposing both. Deception is rampant today, which is indeed one of the signs that we are truly nearing the end of this age and quickly approaching the tribulation and the second coming. For the believer, Jesus gives us some hope that we will not be deceived. He says this a few verses later. He says, "For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect." The verse is referring to the believers that are still present during the actual tribulation, and specifically to the wonders that the prophets, these false prophets, perform. This protection and this promise, however, most likely include all believers during the period of deception immediately preceding the tribulation. In either case, we should be praying. We should be believing. We should be reading the Bible. Believers through all generations need to be prepared for the Lord's return at any moment. To be prepared for the Lord's return at any time means that you are ready. The question is especially important considering what we've already seen and what many have described as the birth pains, meaning that we are closer today than ever before to the coming of the Lord.
Nearly every day, it's common to see, read, or hear something about the end of the world, the apocalypse, or end times. Author and pastor Kenneth Baer's The Apocalypse and Coming Kingdom zooms in and breaks down biblical prophecy as it relates to Jesus' imminent return and the coming 7-year period, including the Great Tribulation. Available in both paperback and Kindle versions. Get your copy on Amazon or at Barnes & Noble and select Christian bookstores. The title again is The Apocalypse and Coming Kingdom. You can also find it listed by author Kenneth Baer. Get your copy today.